It's part of a tragic uh, pattern that's going on worldwide. So I think I call it tragic because I think the net for children is that instead of getting good, nurturing homes in adoption, they will languish in institutions, which we know are horribly destructive for children.
What are some of the reasons that could be behind China's decision?
Politics in the worst sense of that word. I think countries like China that have in the past been sending lots of children out for international adoption homes often feel that it makes them look strong if they keep their children and they claim that they can take care of their children and they don't need Americans. So it's a way of pushing back on America, claiming strength in terms of their own citizens, but does absolutely nothing really for the country in terms of actual strength and simply damages children.
Well, the first official international adoption approved in China was in 1985, nearly 40 years ago now. Has the program been a success?
I would say it's been a tremendous success in terms of children. All the research shows that children do dramatically better when they're placed in adoptive homes as compared to living in institutions or foster care. While there are always going to be examples that countries like China can pull out of children who are abused in adoption, the actual abuse rates are way, way lower than they are in biological homes. So adoption, including international adoption, is a huge success story for children. It also saves countries like China economic resources that get devoted to institutions and also that get devoted to addressing the problems of the children who live and graduate from institutions. Those children end up being a horrible drag on countries. They end up being heavily involved in crime, drug addiction, alcohol. They do not do well for all the reasons that research has shown institutions to be so destructive for children.
And how has China's one-child policy, which was implemented in 1979, how has it impacted which children or how many have been adopted out to foreign families?
Well, certainly the earlier policy limiting families to one child resulted in a number of children many children being surrendered to institutions. And that upped the pressure, I would say, on China to place those children internationally, since there's never been enough domestic adoption homes for children. So yeah, these things are related, but I think the change in China's one-child policy today, where they're allowing parents to have more children, doesn't really itself explain the change in international adoption policy, because they still have children in institutions. If these children were being adopted domestically, they wouldn't need to eliminate international adoption. There's always been a preference for in-country adoption. So if there were enough homes for children, they'd be adopted domestically. They're not being. The reason they're closing down international adoption is they want to shut it down, regardless of the need that children have.
Why have American families in particular been a very important part of the Chinese adoption program over the years?
Adoption is more popular in most non-Asian countries than it is in Asian countries. There's less of a stigma against adoption, and also to some degree, adoption is related to privilege. So the prospective parents who have the luxury of saying, we want more children and we want to step forward and adopt children out of institutions are, they're not typically rich, but they're typically middle class, relatively well off parents. And America has a lot of those kinds of parents.
Well, the US State Department believes there are hundreds of families still pending completion of their adoption. How long and complex a process has it been for them already?
Sadly, there have always been way too many barriers to international adoption. So even when such adoption is allowed, it's been, too restricted. And that means that both prospective parents wait too long, have to jump over too many hoops. But more sadly, it means that children have to wait too long for home. So all the evidence shows what's best for children is placement in a permanent nurturing home as early in life as possible, certainly within the first few months. And tragically, international adoption regulation has meant that has not happened.
And just finally, are there any implications where US-China relations are concerned with this announcement?
I doubt it really, because sadly, it really hasn't been seen to be in US government interest to fight for the rights of children who need adoption. So, that's part of why it's so easy to shut down international adoption. Nobody's fighting for these kids. So from the US government perspective, they don't necessarily want more immigrants. They'd like to make international adoption prospective parents happy, but not if it comes at any cost. So it's easy for the US to give up these children. And it's easy for China to say, oh, we're going to stand up for our sovereignty and keep these children. And, it's kids who pay the price. And if you want the larger international picture, very briefly,
Yep.
the number of kids who have come into the United States since 2004 have dropped. It's like going over a cliff. In 2004, we had some 23,000 children coming in. We now have roughly 1,000 children coming in. So that's the larger international picture, and it's because UNICEF, as well as sending countries like China, are just saying, we want to shut down international adoption for reasons that have nothing to do with the welfare of children.
A really important statistic to note. Professor Elizabeth Bartholet, really good to talk. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for covering this important issue.